I know all the tricks, and I always look alert when I don't care. You see like this. What are you up to?
Johnny Carson ruled late-night television. He was charming, humorous, and always in control. But behind the laughs, he kept a list of names that would never sit across from him again. Some of them were legends, some were rising stars. But one thing they all had in common was a mistake they could never take back. Here are the names of 8 guests that Carson banned and why. Number 1, Joan Rivers. Joan Rivers spent nearly 2 decades building her career on The Tonight Show. She made her first appearance in 1965 and quickly became one of the most popular comedians in the country. Johnny Carson was the one who gave her a real platform, and she credited him often for helping her rise. Over time, she became his most trusted stand-in. By 1983, she was his permanent guest host, sitting behind the desk whenever Carson took time off. And Rivers took the role seriously. For years, Rivers appeared on the show close to 100 times. She and Carson had a warm on-air chemistry, even though the two rarely spent time together outside of the show. Carson was a private man who kept his professional relationships at a careful distance. Rivers understood this and respected it. She saw him as a mentor and even described their relationship as something close to a father and daughter bond. That closeness made what happened in 1986 even more painful for her to process. By the mid-1980s, Rivers was becoming worried about her future at NBC. Carson had recently signed a new 2-year deal with the network, but NBC only offered Rivers a 1-year contract. To her, the difference was clear. It told her that the network was not willing to invest in her the way it had invested in Carson. She had received other offers over the years, but turned them all down out of loyalty. This time, the math no longer made sense to her. Then Fox came calling with something hard to refuse. Fox was launching a brand new television network and needed a bold move to get attention. Executives approached Rivers with an offer that included her own late-night talk show and a deal worth around $10 million. It would make her the first woman ever to host her own late-night show on a major network. Her husband, Edgar Rosenberg, was brought in as producer. For Rivers, it was the dream she had always been working toward. So she said yes before the ink had even dried. However, the problem was timing and communication. Amant Rosenberg advised her not to tell Carson until the deal was fully sealed. His reasoning was practical. Other comedians who had announced competing shows in the past were immediately removed from The Tonight Show, and they still had months to wait before their new programs aired. If the Fox deal fell through after Rivers had told Carson, she could be left with nothing. So she kept quiet and waited until everything was finalized. Then she picked up the phone. Carson got the news from Fox before Rivers could reach him personally. By the time she called, he was already aware. He hung up the phone, she called back, he hung up again. That was the end of 20 years. Carson never spoke to Rivers again, not once, for the remaining years of his life. He told people he felt betrayed, not because Rivers was leaving for a competing show. But because she had not come to him first. He had always given other performers a proper send-off before they launched their own shows, and he expected the same courtesy in return. Rivers was removed from the guest host rotation immediately. Gary Shandling was brought in to fill her slot. But more damaging was the broader effect. Carson's team made it known that any celebrity who appeared on Rivers' new Fox show would not be welcomed back to The Tonight Show. The threat carried enormous weight. The Tonight Show was still the most powerful platform in late night, and very few celebrities were willing to risk their standing with Carson. Rivers struggled to book major guests, and some local television stations even refused to air her show out of loyalty to Carson. Number 2, Jerry Lewis. By the summer of 1975, Jerry Lewis was one of the most recognizable entertainers alive. He had spent decades building a career in film, stand-up, and television. His slapstick work had made him a legend in the United States and something close to a national icon in France. Lewis had appeared on The Tonight Show over 80 times. He had been a guest, a co-host, and a fill-in for Carson multiple times. The relationship between the two men appeared to be one of genuine mutual respect. Lewis was a giant, and Carson treated him accordingly. Carson had always maintained a tight operation behind the scenes. The Tonight Show ran on precision. Every segment was mapped out, every guest was briefed, and every member of the crew understood their role. The show had a carefully managed flow, and the people who kept that flow running were not famous. They were technicians, writers, and production staff who worked long hours without public recognition. Carson knew this and valued it. He built a culture on the show where the crew was treated as essential, not invisible. Don Schiff was the man in charge of cue cards on The Tonight Show. His job was to prepare and hold up cards that helped guests and hosts keep their material organized during tapings. It was a skilled and time-sensitive position. Cue cards could not simply be produced on demand, especially when the content was long and complex. Schiff worked under real pressure, and he was good at his job. He had done it for years without incident. But in 1975, Lewis presented a challenge that pushed things past the breaking point. Lewis arrived at the studio roughly 90 minutes before taping was set to begin. He brought with him a typed monologue and 4 additional single-spaced pages of material. It was far more than Schiff could prepare on short notice. Schiff told Lewis he could get the monologue onto cards in time, but the rest of the material was simply not possible to complete before the cameras rolled. For most guests, this would have been an acceptable answer. The situation was clear. There was not enough time. Lewis did not accept it. Lewis became furious. He raised his voice and directed a torrent of insults at Schiff over something Schiff had no power to change, leaving the man shaken and humiliated in front of others. After the incident, Schiff went to Carson and told him directly that he would never work a taping again when Lewis was involved. Carson listened and did not hesitate when making his decision. Lewis would not return to The Tonight Show as a guest or as a host. The rule applied regardless of who was booking the show or what occasion might come up. Carson's position was absolute. Details of what happened that day stayed quiet for decades. It was only when author Mark Malkoff published his biography of Carson that the full story became public. The incident said something important about how Carson ran his operation. Fame did not protect anyone from consequences inside The Tonight Show's walls. Lewis had appeared 80 times and had a long history with the program, but one of it was enough to override what Carson considered a basic standard of human decency. When Lewis crossed that line, Carson shut the door and didn't open it again. Number 3. Ellen DeGeneres. In November 1986, Ellen DeGeneres walked onto the stage of The Tonight Show and made history. She was 28 years old and had been building a stand-up career in clubs and small venues for several years. That night, Carson did something he had never done before. After her stand-up set, he waved her over to the couch. It was the signal every comedian dreamed of. Being called to sit with Carson meant he endorsed you. It meant your career was about to change. DeGeneres was the first female comedian he had ever given that honor to, and the audience responded warmly. Carson had strict ideas about what The Tonight Show was and what it was not. He ran the program with a high level of control over content, tone, and the image the show projected to its audience. Guests were expected to understand that appearing on The Tonight Show was a privilege that came with certain obligations. They were expected to follow the direction of his producers, perform within the boundaries that had been agreed upon in advance, and not treat the platform as a place to push their own agenda at Carson's expense. These were unspoken rules that performers understood. DeGeneres returned to the show 2 more times before the trouble began. Each appearance went reasonably well. She was building a relationship with the show and earning her place as a regular guest. Her stand-up material was getting sharper, and she was developing a national following. The Tonight Show was playing a direct role in that rise. For a young comedian at that stage of their career, an invitation back to Carson's couch was not something to take lightly. The stakes were high and the opportunities were real. Before her 3rd appearance in May 1987, Carson's team gave her a specific instruction. There was a joke in her planned material that the show did not want her to perform. The reasons were not made public, and the exact content of the joke was never fully disclosed. DeGeneres heard the instruction and acknowledged it. The matter seemed settled before the cameras ever turned on. Then she went ahead and did the joke anyway. Carson had watched from wherever he was monitoring the show, and he wasn't impressed. His team knew it too. After the taping ended, co-producer Jim McCauley found DeGeneres in the green room. He dressed her down in front of everyone present, including her guest. After the show's publicist, Charlie Barrett, watched the entire exchange and later described what happened in detail. Macaulay pointed at DeGeneres and told her plainly that she had been told not to use that material. DeGeneres stood there visibly embarrassed as the room went quiet around her. Then, Macaulay then told her and her guest to leave. The final words he said to her made the situation clear. DeGeneres was not invited back to The Tonight Show. The show moved on as if she had never been part of it. She returned in 1989, but only because Jay Leno was guest hosting that week. What the story revealed was how little it took to lose Carson's trust. DeGeneres had been given a clear instruction. She had been trusted to follow it, and she had made a different choice. In Carson's world, that was not a small thing. It was a breach of the agreement that made The Tonight Show work. Once that trust was gone, Carson was not the kind of man to offer it again. Number 4. William Shatner. William Shatner arrived at The Tonight Show in 1983 as a well-established television star. He had spent years as Captain James T. Kirk on Star Trek, and more recently starred in the police drama T.J. Hooker, which was airing on ABC at the time. Shatner was confident and experienced on camera. He was used to performing under pressure and handling himself in front of audiences. He did not arrive at the show expecting any trouble. As far as he was concerned, it was just another television appearance, and he had done thousands of them. The Tonight Show had rules that were not written down anywhere. They were understood by regular guests and by the people who worked in entertainment circles long enough to absorb them. Conversations on the show had a rhythm. The host asked questions, the guest answered, and there was room for the host to steer the exchange. Carson was sharp and quick, and he liked to be in control of the direction a conversation took. When guests disrupted that flow, the discomfort was visible, even if Carson kept his expression pleasant throughout. Shatner's first mistake happened within minutes of sitting down. He began talking, and did not stop. He spoke continuously for roughly 4 minutes without giving Carson an opportunity to interject. This was not an acceptable way to conduct a conversation on The Tonight Show. Carson was not there to listen. He was the host. Sure, the back-and-forth exchange was the entire format of the segment. When a guest took over the floor and held it, they were shutting Carson out of his own show. Shatner apparently had no idea this was happening, or that it was a problem. The second mistake came when Buddy Hackett was also on the couch. Hackett was one of the most beloved recurring guests in the show's history, and his relationship with Carson was long-standing. During the segment, Shatner physically turned his back on Carson to speak directly to Hackett. Turning one's back on the host while sitting on the guest couch was considered deeply disrespectful inside the culture of the show. Carson was the center of every conversation that took place on that set. Ignoring him in favor of another guest was a breach. The third mistake was about television loyalty. The Tonight Show aired on NBC, and there was room for guests to mention their own television projects, even if those projects aired on competing networks. What they could not do was name the competing network on air. Shatner was promoting T.J. Hooker, which was on ABC. During the conversation, he mentioned both the show's name and the network it aired on. The word ABC was muted when the episode was broadcast, which was the show's standard response to such a slip. But the damage had already been done. Carson kept his composure throughout the taping. He was too experienced and too professional to let his feelings show on camera. He smiled, he kept the conversation moving, and he gave no visible indication that anything had gone wrong. That was part of what made Carson so effective as a host. In being his reaction stayed hidden behind a smooth and practiced exterior. The crew and producers around him knew how to read the signs, but a guest like Shatner, who had no deep history with the show, would not have sensed that anything was different. After that particular taping, Shatner was not invited back as a guest while Carson was hosting. The ban was never directly communicated to Shatner, who remained confused about the situation for a long time. He later told a journalist that he never understood why Carson seemed to develop such a strong dislike for certain people. None of the offenses had been intentional. Shatner had not set out to dominate the conversation, disrespect the host, or violate any rule he was aware of. He simply didn't know the customs of the show well enough to avoid stepping on them. Number 5. Orson Welles. Orson Welles first came to The Tonight Show as a guest in 1978, and it seemed like a natural fit. Welles was one of the most admired creative minds in American entertainment. His work in film, radio, and theater had given him a legacy that very few people in the history of the industry could match. Carson respected Wells deeply. He considered him a genuine genius and made no secret of his admiration. Wells became a welcome presence on the show, returning multiple times and finding a comfortable rapport with Carson during their conversations. What made the relationship between these two men interesting was something most viewers did not know. Carson was a serious amateur magician. He had been performing magic since he was a child growing up in Nebraska, and he maintained a deep passion for the craft throughout his adult life. Wells was also known for his interest in magic and mentalism. It was a hobby he had pursued for years, and he brought that interest with him to the show on multiple occasions. Carson was aware of it and generally enjoyed seeing what Wells could do in front of an audience. The fifth time was when things went wrong. Wells told Carson ahead of the taping that he would be performing a mentalist routine. Carson was skeptical, but said nothing to stop it. He had seen plenty of mentalism over the years and knew how these acts worked. He watched as Wells set up the routine and began performing for the audience. The act was supposed to appear as a demonstration of extraordinary perception or intuition. Like all mentalist acts, it required assistance that the audience was not supposed to see. That assistance was supposed to be invisible. Unfortunately, it was visible in the worst possible way. Wells had hired two men to sit in the studio audience and assist him at specific moments during the routine. These were plants, a common tool in mentalism and stage magic, where Confederates positioned in the crowd helped create the illusion. The problem was that the two men made mistakes. Their cues were missed, their timing was off, and the act fell apart in front of everyone watching. What should have looked effortless and mysterious instead revealed the scaffolding behind it. The audience saw the failure, and so did Carson. Carson's reaction was not about the failure of the trick itself. He had a clear rule he held regarding magic. A performer could use misdirection, then sleight of hand, hidden mechanisms, or any other honest form of trickery as part of a proper act. What was not acceptable was placing deceptive actors in the crowd to create a false appearance of supernatural ability or audience participation. Carson had banned other performers for similar reasons. Audience plants crossed a line that Carson saw as fundamental to the integrity of the art form, and so Wells never appeared as a guest on The Tonight Show with Carson again. Number 6. Dana Carvey. Dana Carvey joined the cast of Saturday Night Live in 1986 and quickly became one of its most valuable performers. His ability to capture the voice and mannerisms of public figures made him stand out in a cast full of talented people. First among his early impressions was a version of Johnny Carson that he had developed and performed on the show multiple times. Carson noticed, and according to Carvey's own account, seemed genuinely amused at first. The impression was not in any way cruel, and it played on the familiar qualities that audiences already associated with Carson. Carvey made his first visit on The Tonight Show in 1987, and Carson introduced him as a very talented young comedic actor. Their on-air conversation was relaxed and easy. Carvey talked about his life, his family, and his growing career on SNL. Carson was interested and engaged. The two men seemed to get along well, and Carvey walked away with the impression that Carson liked him. Over the following 3 years, Carson continued to invite Carvey to anniversary shows and special occasions, where the two sat together and looked back at clips from previous appearances. SNL, however, was always going to push the material further than Carson felt comfortable with. The show had been making jokes at Carson's expense for long. Some of those jokes were gentle, others were not. By the late 1980s, the sketches about Carson had moved beyond playful imitation and into something worse. Carvey and writer Robert Smigel developed a series of pieces that depicted Carson as a man who was losing his grip, growing out of touch, and struggling to remain relevant in a television landscape that had shifted around him. The Carsenio sketch was the one that moved things past the point of no return. It depicted Carvey's version of Carson, attempting to transform himself into a younger, hipper version of rival Arsenio Hall, who was drawing large audiences with his own late-night show at the time. The character wore bright colors, used slang associated with younger audiences, and performed Hall's signature pump the fist in the air gesture. The sketch made Carson look desperate and ridiculous, as though he was pretending to be what he was not in order to stay relevant. The Tonight Show's production team was furious. According to those inside the show, Carson apparently felt the sketch had crossed a line from comedy into mockery of his dignity, and he no longer saw Carvey's work as harmless fun. The ban was put into effect. Carvey, who was at one of the highest points of his career, with the Wayne's World film about to be released, found that The Tonight Show was no longer available to him. Carson refused to allow Carvey to promote the movie on the show. For a film actor, losing a platform that large was a meaningful consequence. After Carson's retirement, Carvey spoke openly about the situation in various interviews. He seemed to understand what had happened and why, even if he found it difficult to fully accept. He explained the creative logic behind the sketches and acknowledged that some of them may have been more aggressive than necessary. Carson never addressed the situation publicly himself, which was typical of the man. He rarely engaged in public disputes. He simply made his decisions in private and let the absence of an invitation speak for itself. Number 7. Steve Allen. Steve Allen was the man who started it all. When NBC launched The Tonight Show in 1954, Allen was the host who defined what the show could be. He brought music, comedy, all and a loose improvisational energy to late-night television that had never existed before. He stayed with the show for 3 years before handing it off to Jack Parr, and he left behind a format that every host who followed would spend decades building on. By the time Johnny Carson took over in 1962, Allen was already a legend in the field Carson had just entered. Carson was very appreciative of what Allen had built. He acknowledged his predecessor's influence many times over the years and made a point of keeping Allen connected to the show that Allen had created. In the decades that followed, Allen returned as a guest or as a substitute host on more than 60 occasions. He appeared in various capacities, filled in when Carson took vacations, and was treated with the kind of respect typically reserved for founders and pioneers. The relationship between the two men appeared to be one of warmth and professional admiration, at least from the outside. By 1982, Allen had been a part of The Tonight Show's history for nearly 30 years in one form or another. He knew the show so well, and Carson trusted him with the platform, not until Allen arrived to guest host what turned out to be his final week in that role. During the hosting week, Allen made a joke in his monologue at Carson's expense. The joke referenced a recent exercise accident that had kept Carson away from the show. It was meant to be funny, but it landed badly with the people inside the show's operation. Crew members who were present during the taping took offense. The situation might have remained a minor irritation if it had ended there. It did not. Before the week was over, a separate incident occurred that was less ambiguous than the joke. Allen's own team had requested changes to the show's format during his hosting week. The show's crew made those changes at the request of Allen's associates. Then Allen, apparently unaware that his own people had made the request, called a crew member directly and began yelling at them over the changes that had been implemented. The crew member had done exactly what was asked and was now being berated for it. The crew member went to Carson and told him what had happened. In response, Carson told the crew member that the situation was handled. Allen had been banned, the matter was closed, and the crew member would not need to worry about it happening again. Allen was never given the opportunity to explain or apologize. He was not called in to discuss what had happened. The decision was made privately and communicated to the people who needed to know. Allen continued to appear on the show, but only when a guest host other than Carson was behind the desk. Number 8. Carl Sagan. Carl Sagan was one of the most respected scientists of his generation. He was an astrophysicist, a writer, and a communicator who had a rare ability to explain complex ideas to ordinary people in ways that were both accurate and compelling. His television series Cosmos, which aired in 1985, reached millions of viewers around the world and changed the way many people thought about science and the universe. Sagan was the kind of figure who made scientific knowledge feel accessible rather than daunting. That quality made him valuable to a show like The Tonight Show. Carson had a well-known interest in science. He was curious and well-read, and he enjoyed conversations that went beyond entertainment gossip or celebrity promotion. Sagan fit naturally into the kind of interview Carson liked to have. Over the years, Sagan appeared on the show roughly 24 times, making him one of the more frequent returning guests in the show's history. A friendship developed between the two men, or at least something close enough to friendship that Sagan had reason to feel comfortable in that setting. Their conversations were collaborative, Carson would ask questions, Sagan would answer, and together they would bring science to an audience that might not seek it out on its own. This format worked because it required a certain kind of balance. Sagan was the expert, and Carson was the curious layperson. And that dynamic was the engine of every exchange they had. Carson knew enough science to ask intelligent questions, but he was always positioned as the student. That was a role he accepted and even enjoyed, up to a point. In January 1986, Halley's Comet was making its once-in-a-generation pass through the inner solar system. It was one of the most anticipated astronomical events in years, and it attracted wide public attention. Sagan appeared on The Tonight Show to discuss the comet with Carson, which was exactly the kind of appearance that had made their relationship so productive. The subject was timely, the audience was interested, and Sagan was the ideal person to explain what was happening in the sky. Once, it was supposed to be another successful conversation between the two men. During the interview, Carson made a factual error. He said something about Halley's Comet that was not correct. Sagan corrected him. This was not unusual in a conversation involving complex scientific information. Carson acknowledged the correction and moved on. A few minutes later, Carson made another factual error. Sagan corrected him again. Both corrections were delivered without hostility. Sagan was not trying to humiliate Carson. He was simply being truthful, which was the quality that had made him valuable to the show in the first place. The studio audience noticed nothing unusual. The segment wrapped up in the normal way, and Sagan left the building having no reason to believe anything had gone wrong between them. Or what was happening inside Carson's mind was a different story entirely. Carson had been embarrassed in front of his audience. For a man with Carson's pride and his deep investment in appearing intelligent and well-informed during interviews, the open correction was painful. And just like that, Sagan's name was removed from the list of people who would be invited back to The Tonight Show.